If you have some background noise, please mute yourself and then unmute when you would like to ask a question. This is kind of an open forum, so if you do have a question, please sing out. You can also raise your hand. We can answer privately or to the whole list. The two presenters, Jill and Darby, would gladly answer your questions. In the meantime, there will be some time at the end of the presentation that you can ask a little more formal questions. And then if you have any inquiries for more details on text and data mining, you can certainly send those to Iris Haney. And I have her email and phone number at the end of this presentation as well. The presentation will be sent out to everybody, so stay tuned for that email. In the meantime, welcome to the Text and Data Mining webinar. Thank you very much for taking time out this morning. And I'd like to begin with talking a little bit about, let me advance the screen here. Oops. How did that happen? About unlimited priorities. Unlimited priorities is the exclusive content sales marketing representative for Accessible Archives, and we are presenting this webinar, and we feel that this particular topic is of great interest to both librarians as well as users of both Accessible Archives content and content out there in the library. A quick overview. We'll talk a little bit about Accessible Archives, about 2 minutes, and then we will start with an overview by Jill, and then we'll kind of do a text and data mining in action with Darby. There will be a Q&A session at the end. If you have questions, you can type them in or just speak them out. Primary sources document the past. Aside from human memory and the unrecorded passing down of information from generation to generation, these histories based upon primary sources are really the only way the current generation can hope to understand what happened before. Accessible Archives' diverse primary source materials provide broad views across 200 years of American history and the culture of the 18th and 19th centuries through full-text searches and digital images. Accessible Archives content provides the opportunity for users to spend more time exploring documents and less time searching for them. Please note the number of disciplines that utilize Accessible Archives content to support the classroom, research, and general interest learning. And now, on with our webinar. Our first presenter is Jill O'Neill, who is the Educational Programs Manager for the National Information Standards Organization. Jill?
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate your kind introduction. I'm going to approach today by essentially giving you an overview, not so much about what's happening in libraries, because I believe the audience here probably can tell me more about that than I could ever know instead, but I think what I can offer are some insights into how content providers themselves are thinking about text and data mining. First of all, this is a definition so that we have a general sense altogether of what it is we're talking about. And it's text and data mining is any automated analytical technique aiming to analyze text and data in digital form in order to generate information such as patterns, trends, and correlations. This technique is gaining in importance in part because of the vast amount of digital content that's being made available, and also because of the amount of data that is generated as a common practice in our modern society. There was a particularly interesting tweet that emerged from a recent meeting of the Copyright Society of America. It's a gathering of copyright professionals, and they were talking about a lot of different topics at their annual meeting: piracy, the Internet of Things, etc. But one comment that was made that I thought was fascinating was that if you own a late model car, it's probably the most sophisticated computing device you own. And what that actually translates to with regard to the generation of data is that a connected car spits out about 100 petabytes of data in a year. Right now, as a comparison, the Library of Congress has 10 petabytes. So as we're moving into this realm, it's clearly going to be important that we understand how to work with the digital text and data that's available to us. What you see on screen here is a set of papers that were delivered last year at the 5th International Workshop on Mining Scientific Publications. And what I think makes these particular papers interesting is that it shows both current uses for text and data mining. So you can see there was a paper about capturing the interdisciplinary nature of discrete chunks of content, that is, abstracts. Also, there was a paper on quantifying conceptual novelty in biomedical literature. So those are things that you would actually use text or data mining to learn, to see, to discern, to understand. And the other papers were more oriented towards the development of tools and techniques and focusing very much on content extraction. So for one of the ones I thought that was particularly interesting was the extraction of relevant text from PDF research articles using font analysis. So how does a system recognize what text is relevant to a particular inquiry? Well, if it appears in the context of a subhead in the text, that may be a cue whereby you can train your system to know that that's an important element. So what do you need to perform this practice, this activity? Well, first you need a critical mass of digital content. And to be fair, it's not just digital content or data. In particular with text mining, you want full text if at all possible. In an ideal world, for many types of research, you want the content in XML. And for most purposes, you don't necessarily want just the content that is provided by a single publisher or content provider. You want it to cross providers because content comes from a variety of places and you need to ensure that you've looked at everything. There are software tools that are being developed, but what makes this particularly challenging is that what's needed very much depends upon what the specific requirements are of a particular domain and the specific nature of the investigation itself. So there may be instances where you could use Python, or you might want to use other tools that are available but which would be appropriate for biomedical investigations, but not necessarily for investigations in the humanities. You may need to have ancillary or external resources, ontologies, taxonomies, vocabulary, thesauri. This is also that you can train the system to recognize whether something belongs or doesn't belong. It's to help you make sense of the data and text that's available. The other thing that needs to be looked at is the fact that individual researchers are doing this, not corporate entities, and individual skill sets will be different. And I'm sure that the librarians listening in here today recognize that what they are asked to do for specific research investigations differs according to the individual researcher who's standing in front of them asking for assistance. So what's important to know here is that all of the parties, all of the stakeholders are equally invested and equally engaged in trying to make this work. So if you are a content or platform provider, and I want to make it clear that I do include libraries in that category simply because they too, if you look at an organization like the Hathi Trust, they too are putting considerable effort into creating usable content in a functional platform environment. And so they're going through the process of ingesting content. They're trying to unify the document structure. They're enriching it with semantic tagging. They are providing platform functionality of various sorts. And they are providing access to that content on an open platform, or in some instances, a fee-paid platform. Now, if you're the researcher or I'm sorry, could you go back 1 minute? Could you turn back that slide one? Back. Back.
Previous. Hold on, there we go. Whoa.
No, I need to go back. My point, there we go. My point is that the researcher is approaching his investigation through a different type of process. The researcher determines the scope of the content that's needed. They download, and frequently researchers tell us that they need to do the normalization of the content from the various sources themselves. They have to run an extraction process. They analyze what is the result of those processes, the algorithms, and then they have to interpret and publish results. Okay. So how are content providers being challenged to make this work? Well, for one thing, this requires a certain amount of short-term and long-term planning. And let's say over the course of an ongoing 3-year period, what might a provider need to be concerned about? Well, they're going to be thinking about the content preparation and enhancement. So they're looking at the tagging. They're trying to make sure that the full text that's made available is useful to the actual researcher. They also are looking very seriously at the allocation of their available resources, and it's a question not just of infrastructure, but also, and this is very important, the allocation of their staff's time. How much time do I need to give a particular programmer or developer in order for them to create the type of API that will enable the researcher to do the sort of text mining or download the content that they really need? The staff needs to develop workflows. This is time consuming, and it is something that is necessary to ensure effective use of the content. From an infrastructure standpoint, if you're the IT person, I'm sorry, could you go back? Thank you. From an infrastructure standpoint, the content providers, the platform providers are worried about system stability. How much volume are we really going to experience? What is this going to siphon off of my system? I can't have it be destabilized when I have other customers who may need to access the platform. And content providers are as libraries do themselves, are trying to develop the appropriate policies whereby they control all of this. So what's key here is they really do want to enable the use. They are concerned about protecting their digital assets against inappropriate use, but it isn't. Most content providers are interested in trying to enable the practice. It's a question of how do we make this happen? And the fact remains that APIs are necessary. There are very few out-of-the-box solutions. And the other key element is that everyone's system needs to work with a variety of different types of tools. Again, the researcher's preferred tools in biomedicine may not be the same type of preferred tool that someone would be working with in art history or in history. So how do we ensure that this content will work with the preferred tools for a particular domain? So what we're really talking about right now as stakeholders is what needs to be done in order to negotiate the complexities. The problem is that the lack of predictability, the fact that this is still an emerging environment, means that content providers need to understand what they're really being asked to do. They need to understand what the researcher wants to do, because it may be a different use of content than that for which the content or the data had originally been created or developed. They need to be able to know, again, how to allocate their staff's time and resources. Publishers come in different shapes and sizes, so the resources that may be available to a very large commercial publisher are not necessarily the resources that a small or mid-sized society may be able to offer. There are things that we need to negotiate between what a content provider's platform can tolerate and what a researcher actually needs. There have been complaints, for example, that publishers only permit the downloading of 10,000 articles in a 24-hour period, and from a researcher perspective, that's very slow. There are concerns that maybe the snippets that are permitted to be downloaded are only 200 characters. Again, it's not necessarily what a researcher feels is adequate. So there are those types of negotiations that need to be made clear. And again, it's not necessarily that content providers are trying to be obstructionists. What they're trying to do is understand the nature of the need, and there is no scalability at present because all of the different research projects vary from domain to domain, and even within a domain, what the researcher wants to do may be different. So finally, and this feeds into the educational requirement, what content providers may be looking for is they need to understand what the actual degree of demand is. They're looking for a better sense of the type of work that's being done in specific domains. And they are interested in understanding what the volume of usage is. And all of this they simply want to know so that they can ensure that they can operate in an efficient fashion in a way that will scale once the practice of text and data mining truly takes hold. And I did just want to include a couple of useful resources here. Kristen Cooper released a wonderful list of text mining resources in the most recent issue of Issues in Science and Technology Librarianship. It's a wonderful list. It's fairly comprehensive, and I found it very useful myself in preparing for this talk. Another interesting and useful report to review for purposes of understanding the context of what's happening in higher education and public research is the report that was prepared by the research consulting firm on behalf of a French government body that is, again, trying to move forward in what policies need to be in place in order to best support the needs of public research. There is a webinar that NISO did in conjunction with ICSTI, the International Council of Science and Technical Information, last June, that's available through our website. And finally, the text and data mining introduction that Carnegie Mellon developed for its own researchers is great. Extra credit reading that I reference at the bottom there is just an indication of what type of work. If you read those two books, you get a much better sense of what the outputs are from these text and data mining initiatives. So I can recommend both of those. And with that, I'm through my time, and it's Darby's turn.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Our next presenter is Darby Gortat, and he has been a trailblazer in negotiating digital historical resources for text and data mining. He is with the North Carolina State University Libraries. Darby, take it away.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Jill, for that excellent presentation. Thank you to the organizers and to all of you attending this webinar today. I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Jill's introduced and delve a bit more deeply into some, especially with a more futuristic mindset, where all of this mining gold rush might be headed in terms of emerging and near horizon and maybe even farther horizon technologies, practices, and cultures of scholarship. Most importantly, I want to encourage all of you librarians to be thinking about what our place is in securing and facilitating mining activities, not just as they are being undertaken now, but even more importantly as they will be soon. I think this is very important as we take our rightful place right now as value-adding intermediaries between researchers and data sets, and we need to be the party in the transaction that is most clearly thinking ahead. This is what our users expect of us and what will continue to make us relevant and valuable as a profession. Now, in our fourth slide, Jill noted this at least ideal parity of engagement between content providers and researchers in mining research. And I'm glad that she pointed out that she considers libraries on that content provider side of things because the library could be invisible here. The library really is both content provider and also playing this role of intermediary between content providers and mining researchers. That's where the library should be. We should be playing this role of connective tissue here. We should be the matrix supporting the partnership of content providers on the one side and scholarly investigators on the other. Academic libraries have traditionally been gateways to relevant content for our user communities. And what is relevant now and what will be increasingly relevant in the future is content that is accessible for computational or computer-assisted research. For us not to provide content mining access to our resources would be for us to surrender our role as gateway and enabler of research. It would be just as poor a decision for the institution of the library as if, with the dawning of the digital age, we had said, no, libraries are about the codex. We provide printed books, and we washed our hands of electronic content. We'd still be around. The rumors of the death of print have been greatly exaggerated, but we'd be far less robust and vital to the research enterprise. My fear is that if we in libraries are too slow to engage in supporting and securing access for content mining, that we'll end up just as irrelevant in the world that is coming. You'll notice that I use the term content mining. I much prefer this to text and data mining because it is less limiting. Information comes in many formats, not just text and numbers. While technically data does not just refer to quantitative data, that's the notion that generally comes to mind when we encounter the term. By speaking instead of content mining, we immediately evoke the fuller picture of possible formats, not simply text and numbers, but images, audio, video, and more. This is important because these formats are already being mined by scholars, and we need to consider and secure access for mining to digital content across all these formats. I presently work, for example, with a computer engineer who is developing an artificial intelligence program for teleconferencing, trying to algorithmically train the AI, the artificial intelligence, to tell when one person is about to stop talking and another about to respond, so that the computer can automatically act as camera person and cut to the next speaker. Another research team I support is currently training computers to mine the spoken word in multiple foreign languages. Just imagine the possibilities when these sorts of technological developments are available for digital humanities applications. Many years ago, when I first set out to negotiate access for mining purposes to digitized historical collections, I was cognizant of the purposes to which historically focused researchers might soon be putting computational attention, and these two revealed the need to consider content very broadly. Humanists, for example, have traditionally looked at broken or worn type as indicators of priority of multiple versions of a printed text or of evidence to identify an uncredited printer. It was not hard for me to imagine a computer being tasked with the menial and mind-numbing task of examining and comparing letters across books. But this would require that image files be available to the researcher, not just OCR or text surrogates. I envisioned researchers wanting to use the processing power of computers to analyze visual images, and was delighted when, soon after I successfully negotiated access for content mining, access to a corpus of 19th century newspapers, my colleague Dr. Paul Fife in the NC State Department of English began a fascinating 19th century newspaper analytics project. Next slide, please. Quote, developing techniques in computer vision and image processing for large-scale interpretation of historical illustrations. This project, which was a runner-up in the 2016 British Library Labs Awards for Research, simply would not have been possible without the NCSU Library's role in brokering access for full content mining purposes. I developed the Basic Access Model, or BAM, as a framework for business terms for librarians to ensure that agreements for access to content sufficiently address mining needs, now and on into the future. I have included at the end of my slide references where I delve more deeply into BAM, as well as have written about the barriers and fears of many vendors regarding opening up such access. So I won't go into these issues right now, but I'll point you to those articles. So BAM covers the business terms, but what I'm often asked for by librarians are licensing terms. On the licensing end, I have the pleasure of working with many excellent colleagues here at NC State, and especially my colleague Tessa Minshew has been a close collaborator in getting these agreements struck. While we are hesitant to claim ours as necessarily model language, here's the mining access language that we begin and sometimes end with. As is often the case, there are minor tweaks or rephrasings generally to appease counsel on various sides. And it's also important to note that what we're actually licensing is not the right to mine. I subscribe to the basic doctrine that the right to read is the right to mine. We are instead contractually agreeing upon means of access to the data in a way that it can be mined, which is generally the raw data, or really all the files, XML, data, whatever it may be, images, so on and so forth. Quite a few commercial content providers have now agreed to BAM terms in striking agreements with the NCSU libraries, meaning that we now have available to our users a significant range of ready-to-mine historical content. Frustratingly, only a few of these vendors have thus far freely and publicly opened up these terms to all of their customers. Hopefully we'll see more of that happening as more and more library customers insist on these terms. This is a good point at which to call out our webinar host today. Unlimited Priorities and Accessible Archives have been model partners with libraries in making historical resources available for content mining. They were an early adopter of BAM even before I came up with that catchy acronym. And quite frankly, Unlimited Priorities was so easy to work with as they quickly saw the benefits and the inherent fairness of these terms and jumped on the opportunity to be an industry leader in this area. I am hoping for not just more vendors, but also a lot more libraries to be leaders in securing basic access for mining also. And hopefully the strong attendance for today's webinar is an indication of growing interest in this. The major objections I hear from libraries when it comes to securing access for mining emphasize current and quite temporary circumstances. For example, I hear, our users don't do that, or we need better tools or better support systems with which to mine. To the first of those objections, I say, no matter where you are, some and probably many of your users almost certainly are mining already. They're just not necessarily coming to you for what they need. Certainly this is happening in the social sciences and STEM areas. Most content miners of historical resources at this stage are more of experimenters, and they are also generally using what's readily available. Very, very few of us in libraries have hung out a shingle to our researchers that they can mine our resources. Here, by the way, on the screen is one of NC State's shingles. This is a button that one can select on our research support portal. It basically says, hey, we support this kind of activity. Hanging out that shingle, furthermore, fosters the interest. Many of our faculty and students right now, especially in the humanities disciplines, are what I call mining curious, and it takes only a nudge to get them going. Sometimes simply the nudge of knowing that the libraries wants to provide such content to get them seeing mining as a genuine research option. Regarding better tools, and these are certainly never a bad thing, but access to content must be secured first. While we should enthusiastically embrace new tools and technologies, both content providers and libraries should remember that neither of us generally are primarily in the tool business. We are about content, connections, and access. We will always be net importers of tools from other industries, especially when it comes to computational research. Yet, while libraries will not single-handedly define the future, we should plan for it. On the technology side, artificial intelligence programs are getting better and better at analyzing large amounts of data, and increasingly of messier and messier data. While clean, structured, and metadata-rich data sets will always be preferred, certainly they are now, the messy will be less and less of a problem. In the future, the quality and relevance of the content itself will matter more than the quality of its container. On the industry side, we can expect further consolidation of the academic market, and even possibly the acquisition of much of the sector from without. What that means is vending models and the sympathy of vendors for academic needs could change dramatically. Why we need to act now. Within scholarly disciplines, we should expect incremental change, but towards computational research impacting every field. In historically focused disciplines, content mining will not supplant traditional historical methods, I don't believe, but will complement them. Mining will become a specialization for some humanists, but all will need to be conversant with it and know at least enough about the methods of content mining to interpret the results of computational research. Therefore, we should expect and be supporting the corresponding changes to especially graduate level curricula. Within libraries, we will be expected to offer computationally manipulable access to our resources. Resources that are not accessible in this way will languish in the same way that, say, our microform collections languish now. There's a lot of great content there, but the format makes these collections of last resort. If research libraries and librarians ourselves do not wish to be just institutions of last resort, we need to focus our efforts now on securing basic access for mining and being proactive and forward-thinking prospective partners in this new gold rush, rather than libraries effectively becoming the abandoned ghost towns that such a gold rush can leave behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Darby. We'd like to go to a question and answer session. And we do have a question. I hope Iris Haney is still online. This one's from Cody. Are the accessible archives collections open to text and data mining? If so,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Iris, Cody has asked a question about accessible archives. Are the accessible archives collections open to TDM? If so, how?
Thank you all for attending, and thanks for the presentations as well. I'm getting a message on the screen that says there's some audio difficulties, so if you're experiencing any, this is being recorded so we can catch you on the recording as well. Yes, accessible archives data is available for text and data mining. We do have some parameters of how it's available, which we've learned through the School of Hard Knocks, and I would be more than happy to go over them with you. But we do not believe that text and data mining is a revenue stream. We believe it's your rite of passage when you acquire permanent access to a title, and we're more than happy to work with you in that direction. And as Darby has said, our license agreement is, I don't want to either say that we think it's a perfect model, but we think it's pretty close. So we make it quite easy for you to be able to enter into a supplement to your already existing license and work with you on text and data mining.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can authenticated users web scrape the accessible archives content for research purposes?
The answer to that is no, because it's very expensive. Because we're 100% counter compliant, and the way counter and statistics measures, it charges for all hits. So when somebody scrapes and or does web mining, text mining directly from the content, it starts to get very expensive, and that's not our goal either. So we don't allow that, but if you contact us, we will work with you on an as-needed basis to come up with a solution that doesn't cost us the farm, so to speak, and still gets you the data that you're interested in having.
Thank you.
And it's worth saying that the results of getting the data from accessible archives is going to be superior than whatever you could scrape, and a lot easier.
It's a lot easier, that's for sure.
Darby, this question's for you from Camille. Do vendors charge extra for the content mining agreements?
The answer to that is largely no. And if you look into if you look into the citations that I've given there, the BAM model does allow for a cost recovery in the delivery of the data, but that is that should be an extremely modest cost, and that would only that would only apply to methods of delivery that actually have a cost. Unfortunately, at the moment, the technology and the bandwidth isn't there for a lot of folks to receive massive amounts of data in one fell swoop, or for some vendors to be able to send that. So even today, and it sounds really arcane, but the best method of delivery from some vendors to some institutions is to actually load this on a hard drive or hard drives and ship it physically, in which case there is a cost for the hard drives, but it should not be a much of a cost whatsoever. We have with some vendors paid the cost of what a hard drive costs that they load it on and they send it to us, and of course we get to keep the hard drive because we paid for it. But that's the cost. It's really important, I think, to negotiate those costs up front and to agree on what cost recovery is, because that's one of the issues that I have with the CRL lib license model license that includes text and data mining in it. It's a great license, except it leaves that issue of cost recovery out there. And I've seen a lot of vendors try to recover costs that really are not appropriate to recover. So.
Let me dive in there for a second as well. There are a couple of other factors. There are, Darby, you're being very librarian politically correct. There are most definitely vendors out there who do see this as a revenue stream. And when you ask, can you data mine, the answer is yes, and we'll send you the price list. So you do have to be very cautious and ask for that. The other caveat is, in our world at Accessible Archives and anyone else we deal with, what Darby's described is exactly what we do. We always download the data onto a hard drive or a DVD if appropriate, and we charge for the equipment, the hard drive, the media, if you will, and the shipping. And you, with tight budgets, have the option, if you want to return the hard drive, well, then you don't have a cost at all, because we do allow for that to happen. The only time we would negotiate with you regarding a fee, which is why it's important to discuss this up front, Darby's 1,000% correct. We have at Accessible Archives an XML TEI Lite fixed format and a standard TIFF image format with MARC records that follow the OCLC format. If you can't handle any of those, and in order to text mine effectively, you need some kind of a conversion to get you into a different format, and you cannot do that yourselves in the library or with your technicians for whatever reason, then a discussion regarding cost has to ensue, because that's not so inexpensive to achieve. It's achievable, but it starts to get pricey. So very important to talk to the publisher, the vendor, and get all this ironed out up front.
And that's where the BAM model supports basic access, all the data. There certainly are plenty of times when you can work with a vendor and you really want some sort of boutique service, you want the data in a particular way, you want it to already be parsed, or you want some piece of it. And in those cases, there may be all kinds of cost on the vendor side, and so it's perfectly appropriate for those situations to be something where you're paying extra for an extra service. But in terms of the basic access should be, as it is with Accessible Archives, part of the cost of purchase. That you can use you can access and use the data in this way.
Are there any additional questions? Okay, well, I would like to thank you all very much for attending. I appreciate the time this morning. And if you have any questions at all, please email or phone Iris Haney at Unlimited Priorities. And this presentation will be available as a YouTube and will also be emailed to each of the participants. Thank you very much.
You might want to forward to the contact screen.
Oh, let's go previous. There you go, for all those inquiring minds. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you, Darby. Thank you, Jill. It was very informative. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks so much
you.
for the opportunity.